Hi, welcome to this CodeRage session about the life of a public store application. This is Marco Cantu, Rad Studio Product Manager at Embarcadero Technologies. And the session I'm going to present is a little unusual compared to some of the other technical sessions at this CodeRage 9 event, because rather than focusing on one specific area of application development with Rad Studio, either Delphi or C++ Builder, the focus here is actually on going through real experiences, real mistakes that I've made, and suggesting you how to avoid them in building and publishing an actual store app for mostly Android, because that's where the app has been successful, but the same application works also on iOS, and some of the tips are actually due to the multi-device nature of the application. So some of the topics we'll look into is naming, advertising, distribution of extra files, status, web service versioning, and there are actually a few more than listed here. The focus of this session is one specific application that I've built with my son, and he's 10. Actually, it was just barely 10 when we started it. The design, the idea, the description of how the application works is fully his. I just was the developer and just did what he suggested and asked. That's why the application is a little strange in the behavior, and I'm going to show you the application in a second. There isn't much action. The short way of describing it is a patient game. You need a lot of time and a lot of patience to proceed in the application. Basically, you have a list of Lego figures. There are roughly 150 right now. And every half an hour, you can get a new one, either a new different one or you can have one duplicate. It's just a random call. So it's very simple in coding terms. All of these figures are grayed out, and then when you have them, you see them in full color. There are a couple of extra features, like the ability to resell for gold and then use gold for speeding up the development, and you can also once a day get some extra gold from a gold mine. You can also trade online, although this helps at the beginning, but then becomes more and more difficult to find online one of the figures that you don't have in your list. This started as a completely personal application. The idea was to give it to a few friends. It has topped 100,000 installations on Android, although it hasn't still reached 100 on iOS. And on weekend days, I'll show you a graph later on. On weekend days, you can make $10 on advertising. So that's the information. Now we can actually have a short look at the website. This is how it is, how it looks, some of the screenshots, and the description of the application. What I want to show you is actually the application itself very shortly. It will highlight a couple of things that we'll discuss later. So let me start it. There is a splash screen, as you can see, followed by a second splash screen with a loading progress bar, because loading all of these images in a grid actually takes a little time. And now here are the images in the grid. And you can scroll up and get to see this large collection of images grouped in different areas. Now, when there is one you don't have, and I have almost all of them, it's shown grayed out. As you can see here, one of these Simpson images, although it's in the Sport collection. What else can you do? Well, as I was saying, you can actually every half an hour get a new figure. You get the box, you can click on it to open it up, and this is the new one I have in my collection. and then you have to wait another 29 minutes and 55, 53, 52 seconds to get a new one. There is a notification option, so we're actually using notification, so you can just close down the application, and in 29 minutes you'll get notified, oh, there is a new figure available. The other thing you can do, if you have enough gold, and I do have 6 gold nuggets, you can actually speed up the figure by pressing on the button, and now you can actually get another one right away. How you get gold? One option is to click 300 times on this guy, and I'm not going to do it because it takes quite a little bit of time. And the other option, if you go to the collection, what you can do, you can sell one of your figures for gold. And the other option, you can trade online, is going to connect to the server, list you all of the images that are available on the server, and if there is one you don't have, you can click on it and trade it. That's it. That's all the application does. So let's start looking into the tips that I have collected during the development of this application. The first is naming. It's almost embarrassing to see how many applications have been published that have com.embarcadero in their name. Now this is bad on iOS, but it's even worse on Play Store, on the Google Play Store, because as you can see, even in the URL, in the public URL for the application, it shows the domain name. Actually, it's the reverse domain name, but that's an identification mechanism that's used for Play Store packages. Now, the same physical information is also on iTunes, but at least it's a little more hidden because the apps are referenced by name and ID rather than by URL. There is another side tip before I forget. On Android, if you upload too often, if you upload another version like in a week, it will get a bit tricky because it won't let you upload an application before people have got the intermediate version. It is technically possible to unpublish and republish, but it's really tricky. You should really make sure you've done all of the proper testing. And also on iOS, given you have to give reviewers time, if you re-upload, they will beat you a bit. Oh, are you just fixing bugs in this upload? That's something they don't want you to do. So going back to the naming, I just noticed that 75% of the apps on this list, on this page, actually have Embarcadero in their list. And honestly, there's nothing I can say. I did that mistake every time I published an app. Now you can unpublish them, but then even if the unpublished apps have 0 users, have never been downloaded by anyone, there is at least no apparent way to remove them. So you keep having around the old versions, unpublished versions of your apps along with the actual application. The thing I wanted to show you is this list of apps that was recently published. Now it's true that it's easier to find on the Play Store apps with that tag, but how many have been published with the Embarcadero in the name is really a bit awkward. A side issue, and then I'm going to show you the settings for those features. A side issue is versioning, because the two worlds have two different models. Now on Android, what really matters is the release number for the APK, for the physical file. They must be in sequence. There is a display version, 1.0, 1.2, 2.0, whatever. That's only for display. The real important thing is to have your release numbers as following consecutive, well, even not consecutive, you can leave holes, but following numbers for the APK release. So you are uploading version 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. On iOS, however, it's exactly the opposite. On iOS, what really matters is the major and minor version number. So 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 2.1 follows, of course, 1.2, and so on. So the solution I found to try to bridge the two areas is to use major minor release as version number and have the major minor following a logical path. So you might go from 1.1 to 2.0, but the release being always an increasing value. So for example, I would go from 1.0 to 8 to 1.1.9, and the last number would be the APK number for on the Android world. These are set up, and here you can see both the configuration and the for the version, the package name. So it's the package name on Android or the CF bundle name. You can spell out the entire name, or you can still use a $module name as an option, but make sure that you replace com Embarcadero with a domain you own. This is how your application becomes a unique reference to yourself. And you can see the version number. On one side, there is this version code, which in this example is 18, and then there is a version name 2.0.18 that's just typed into there. While on iOS, on the other side, the version is 2.0.18, and that's the full version name, and the bundle version is just an effect of entering those numbers. Don't use the automatic version updates, numbering updates when you build, because you're building way more often than you are going to release on the application stores. Again, when you do upload on the current APK has a version, which is the real number, and then among parentheses, the version description that you are using alongside. On the other side, what matters is the true version, although there is also a short version string, which is only major and minor version number that's also displayed on the iOS store. Of course, what matters is that specifically on iOS, you have to declare the version number and then upload a physical file that has the same matching version number. Otherwise, the upload will be rejected. So let's move to another topic, that's advertising. It is as simple as dropping a banner ad. You need to set a Google ID in the banner ad component. You can set it also for the iOS version. It's just going to be ignored. Load the advertising. So that's quite straightforward. Although, again, on specifically on Android, the ad is a separate view, is a separate activity. So you cannot, it's not simple to have an ad on one location on one page and a different location on a different page. My suggestion is just to put the same tBanner ad object into each and every of your forms, and then when you load it, provide there is enough space available on each of the forms by setting the proper height of the banner. As you load the banner ad placeholder will be resized with the proper height depending on your phone, on the ad, and whatever. So what you can do is resize the corresponding objects on all of your forms to the same size of the first one, of the one you have actually loaded. Now things get a little more tricky if your main form can be a different form, depending on the sequence the user goes through, but that's just a way to make a common shared method that resets your banner ads on all forms. Does it work? I mean, not working meaning technically, but meaning in terms of money. Well, yeah, I have to say I was absolutely impressed by the amount of money you can get with a rather simple Play application like the one I've built. On iOS, it doesn't seem to be less effective. Of course, having an extremely smaller number of users, it's difficult to compare, but I consistently see that even the few ads that could be potentially displayed are not always filled. So there's not always an ad displayed when there is a position available. That's not the case on Android, where there is 100% fill of the ads. Now there is AdMob available on iOS, and that would probably be quite an interesting comparison, although there is no direct support in FireMonkey, so you have to manually import the APIs and install your manually your AdMob support for iOS. This is the advertising in action. One is at the development edition, so you don't get ads in the development edition on iOS. You always get ads on Android. And this is the weekend effect I was mentioning on AdMob. Given the type of application, it actually does make some sense that kids that are not at school would use it more on weekends than during the school week. I had to say more than working week. So this is the effect. You can see that Saturdays and Sundays are always peak week after week compared to the rest of the week for the advertising revenues. Another issue I bumped into was the distributing resource files. Now the scenario is that this application has these 150 images. These are physical JPEG or PNG files that are shipped along with the application. When I started, I just used the standard approach that we recommend, which is putting them in the documents folder and then loading from the documents folder from either iOS and Android using slightly different code, but there is support right into the IO utils for getting the proper folders. At the beginning that was fine. I could get it started, but then I hit a roadblock on iOS. On iOS, you're not allowed to store a lot of documents, and in my case, I think it's 5 megs worth of images. You're not allowed to store more than a few files as documents. The reason is that application documents are backed up on iCloud. So if something is distributed with the application and not subject to change, it should not be within the application document. So like a database file would make sense. It has to start small, otherwise we'll incur in the same restriction, but then it can grow and it will be backed up, which is good. But as fixed images like this, honestly don't make sense, as documents don't need to be backed up. They can be re-downloaded along with a new version of the application. So the suggestion I read in a number of places will actually use the library folder. So I tried and make a new version using the library folder, and we was also rejected because, again, even the library folder is backed up on iCloud. So the suggestion I got is, just place them in the application bundle. Now, it took me a little to figure out exactly what does that mean in RAD Studio development terms, and it turns out all you have to do is to deploy to the root, deploy to / as target. Now then the next issue became, how do I load applications if I don't know where that folder is, where the application itself is? Turns out there is one way to know where the application folder is, which is look at the application executable name on iOS, and that's, you guess what, the first command line parameter you receive from the application. So again, for Android, I just deployed to the standard assets internal. There's no automatic backup. There's no big deal in using this approach. And I load from get documents path. From iOS, I deploy on /, and I load from param string 0 as the file path of param string 0, which is the executable name of the application. Executable name and executable path of the application. A very, very old-fashioned trick, but I have to say it works very smoothly, and the application was approved on the App Store with this change. Another issue I've actually blogged about quite a bit in the past is the resource loading time and splash screen. Now, the application loads 150 images. It takes time. No matter what, no matter how you speed it up, no matter if you optimize it, loading 150 images at runtime in a grid is not a trivial half-a-second operation on a phone. It takes a few seconds. Not many, but it takes a few seconds. So what I did is I created a splash screen, I created a form that is loaded automatically. This is the only form that's automatically created on application start when the project starts, and that takes considerably little time to do. And then what this main form does, it turns on a timer, and when the timer fires, I'm actually loading the following forms, the secondary forms. There is more than one, only one is really slow, but just in case, I moved all secondary forms to this delayed loading. Now, it would have been better to use a background task or background thread. That's something I'm going to consider for the future, but for now, it works well enough for my needs. So what happened is that you immediately see something, you immediately get the splash screen rather than a blank screen. And then what I also added, given it was this screen was displaying for quite a bit, is I added a progress bar, as you might have seen in the first part of my demo. And the progress bar goes from 0 to 150 and progresses when a new image is being loaded. So it's a real feedback, it's a real significant feedback of the loading time for those images into the string grid. What I did add also, I already had it on iOS, I also added a real splash screen for Android using the available feature in the IDE for XE7. Notice that this is not an alternative to using the initial splash form, because what happens on Android is that you get a splash screen, then you get a blank screen while the main form is created. You still get that split second, and then you get something to display. Now it's a split second if the first form is fast to create, otherwise it will be a long time blank screen. So you still need the splash form for a slow startup, like consider a main form that has database data or needs to fetch data from remote or load images or do anything that's far from a trivial initialization. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the IDE for Android allows only horizontal splash images. Of course, you have more flexibility. There is a way to have images with 9 tiles that gets compiled and auto-sized properly. Given that my application is vertical only, it doesn't actually display on horizontally. It's a vertical only app, it's a portrait mode only app. So what I did was just load random splash screen with the proper sizes, and then I did replace the physical PNG file that I had referenced from the IDE with a vertical one. That works because when you load in the IDE, it creates the proper XML configuration files for the splash screens, and then if you could replace the horizontal image with the vertical image, that's what's going to ship with the application, and it works pretty smoothly with no real stretching or skewing at runtime. So I found that was actually a nice workaround to the current scenario. Another area that took me a little to fully understand and figure out was saving status. There is status information, like the last time you got an image, how many gold nudges you have, and a few other things. That's saved in the application folder on iOS. I ended up saving on a shared external on Android. That turned out to be a significant mistake because there are Android devices that don't have the shared external unless you have a secondary SD card, or have the shared external mapped to some very odd driver names that are not the standard by the operating system. So I really recommend against using shared external. I had it in my app, now I have it double, so it will either use share external if you already have the configuration file, or default to an application document folder. Now the other side to consider is what happens with the format change. So you update version, you go version from version, you might need more data to be saved. It's very important that you do you do some testing on all of the various options. You might be tempted to test only on your phone, and your phone has the last available version, but there might be users that skip one version, or just install the new version without having ever installed a previous one. So you have to make sure to test in the various scenario. There was one point that I the application, when updating from one given version to another one, like skipping a couple, it will just crash because I didn't do the proper testing for that scenario. And it actually was quite bad because people were complaining and couldn't really move to that new version. So testing becomes difficult when you have many alternative options. And what I did is basically using the file size, or actually I read a few integers, a few numbers, and then I check if I'm at the end of the stream, I'm on an older version. If there is still more data saved in the settings file, then it means I'm on a newer version of the status. And of course, then I save the full version, padding with zeros or whatever, to complete the scenario. Another thing I bumped into is initially I created a web service. The web service is used for trading online. So there are basically two commands in the web service. One is give me a list of the figures currently on the server, and then you can trade one for another. The issue is that after a while I did change the format that's returned. I'm returning more data. I made the store bigger, and then the older application will just crash. And what I completely failed to do in the first round of this web service is adding a versioning call that basically has the concept of I ask for the version. If the version doesn't match, I'm just telling, hey, you cannot use this application for trading anymore. You have to upgrade to a new version of your application. The first time I failed to do that testing, so I still have the server for version 1 of the online trading that has to be kept up and running because there are still a few thousand users on that older version of the application. So that's something you really have to plan and put a lot of care into, because otherwise you'll get stuck. You'll have to keep some servers up and running in older versions like forever, because there will never be a point where there is no one on a given old version of your application. We still have people, like 1,000 people of the first release version that was released almost a year ago, with like probably 10 or 11 versions in between. Speaking of updates, there is one thing that again I found by experience. It is at one point when we started doing the online trading, I added the internet permission to the application because that's what I needed to do the online trading. Now, there is a very significant slowdown in updates on Android when you add extra permissions, because the way it works is most people have their Play Store set up with automatic updates. So you release a new version, people get a notification, the Play Store just automatically updates the new version, and everything gets very smooth, and you can have a 50, 60, 70% upgrade rate within a week from people on the previous version. Now, if you add even one minor extra permission, the automatic process gets stuck, and the users will have to open the Play Store, open the application, approve the extra permission, and then do the upload. So when you do that, you would get something like a 10-15% upgrade rate within the same week time frame, and then a lot of users will actually never move on and remain stuck to that version. So that's a significant issue. My suggestion is to try to consider at the beginning the permissions you might need in the future, and add an extra more than you really need right now, just in case, because it will be easier for people to approve the extra requirements at the very beginning than to add them through the manual update process. This is not an issue on iOS, because on iOS permissions are asked as needed. So when you do the API call, you get the permission request, and it's not an upfront requirement of the application. So it's a completely different scenario. But on Android, changing the permissions or asking for more permissions is something that will slow down the update rate very significantly. So conclusion, Mobile offers an unprecedented distribution opportunity. Again, my experience, I was planning to give it only a few friends. We got thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who downloaded this pretty simple and limited application. It's very interesting in monetization. Again, my initial goal was to tell my son, oh, let's put an ad and we'll share the money. You'll be able to buy one of these small Lego boxes or a couple of minifigures. He can probably buy some of the largest Lego boxes ever with the money we're making. And yeah, there is a lot of complexity. There are lots of hidden details. It's not just the pure development as in the desktop platforms where you have full control of the life of your application, which is good on one side, but it's also bad because it means you have to handle the distribution and the advertising and everything else by yourself. Here you can have an incredible power. The distribution opportunity really comes from the application stores, but they also put a lot of burden, and I haven't even mentioned signing applications, signing all of the paperwork, and doing all of the more formal and then technical requirements that are honestly quite well documented elsewhere. So my goal was mostly to guide you through real discoveries that I made during this development process, and my wish is you'll be able to produce successful apps with Delphi and C++ Builder and a method and put them on the App Store and make a lot of money either by selling the applications or advertising in them. That's all, and let's open it up for questions.
Marco's with me on the line.
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Okay, Marco, I promoted you to organizer so that you can see the questions as well. There's a few by Rob. Rob asked, for loading images into a grid, have you considered using internal memory construct and then populating on display like the virtual list view in VCL or whatever?
Yeah, that would be an option rather than building populating everything in the grid, have some sort of a virtual grid. So while you're scrolling, the items get populated. However, it's a bit tricky because for each item, first there is information attached. There is display information like these labels with the number of copies you have of the figure. The other thing that makes things a little more complex is that there isn't one grid. Again, this project started by putting things together, but what happens is that there are multiple grids, one for each section. So I dynamically create, I think, 8 or 9 grids with panels, dividers, and so that will make things a bit difficult to handle because it's not, again, a single grid. So I should first get to have a single grid, manage the panels in a different way, and it looks like real work, which is not something I was expected to do for this app.
I think it's fun to do something with your children. I think it's very, very cool to do the technology. I guess your son is going to create a whole software company, or maybe he already has a software company.
Oh, well, that's one of his inspirations. Let's see. Well, actually, his preference is still to go to live in Billund and work for Lego, for the Lego company, but that's still young, so we'll see what happens.
Okay. Here's another. Rob's got another question. For versioning of settings and services, my approach is to have the file version at the front and ship with the settings objects for all versions. This means the app can load the settings natively and then create the new settings file from the older version. If you don't want to do all paths, you can use this to do intermediate steps, for example, going from version 1 to 1.1 to 1.2 and so on. Well, what do you think? Yeah, that's actually a good idea. If I were to restart, I would probably use something like that. I mean, as I move to using a versioning, a REST API that returns the version on the web service, I would probably go for saving the version number as the first item of this binary file. But again, this was built on the premise that was just like a half a day development, and that was supposed to be it. Then when the application starts getting popular,
we got feature requests, actually tons of feature requests in the Play Store, and we started. And Jacopo came up with his own further ideas, and so things got way more complex than we were really expecting at the beginning. I guess this is common from most software projects. You start with one scenario, and then things get a bit out of control. Now, if you have full control, you can just kind of take over, restart. If you're building a traditionally distributed Windows application, it's very easy to say, okay, there's a new version, do some migration. But with the mobile deployment, you get something which is great, which is the ability to have tons of users with no effort. But again, we have at least 100. I think we released like 10 versions on the Play Store, and we still have at least 100 users on each of those 10 versions. And a few of the versions have tens of thousands, but they never go away, and they will really possibly migrate from each to each version, skipping 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 intermediate versions. You really never know, and it's difficult to write something now that is still compatible with all of the intermediate and even the first one, which was done in a very simple fashion with a more naive approach.
Is it easy to direct users to the store to grab the latest update?
No, that's not terribly easy. Well, there are two scenarios. There are people that actually don't use the app anymore, so it's tough. There are other people that use it and use older versions. Now, for example, the idea of having this versioning system in the web service when you are trading means that we can the application is the old applications already have the logic to say if the version I found is newer than what I'm expecting, I suggest the user to get the new version. So that's something you can build into proactively. So you can build something that is going to work in the future, and actually did the testing. I switched the web server for a second just to make sure it would work when eventually I'll upgrade to a new version. So that's a way to push people to upgrade. But in general, it's not trivial. You don't know when you're going to release a new version. Again, the experience is that people tend to automatically update a lot of apps unless you make a change in the permissions, then that becomes really a roadblock to updates.
And how did you get more than 100,000 users on Android and not that many on iOS? Why not iOS?
Well, I think part of it is that the version currently on iOS, well, it's feature limited, and also it's not as smooth in the UI. We got to fix the UI on iOS. Actually, the current version I have on my device is pretty smooth. Then, of course, we got into the new App Store submission issue and other things. So I ended up, we're not putting enough care and enough focus on iOS development because, well, you say, oh, there's only a few people. So maybe if we release a very good one on iOS, it will get up. But it's really a platform. I think when you start getting popular on one platform, then the popularity is like a self-fulfilling promise. Because what happens is that if you now search minifigure or Lego figure or some of these terms on Play Store, this application comes within the first few, even before like official Lego applications. And also, and so that's probably contributed. And the fact that at the beginning the rating was very high, then it got a little lower, it probably helped a lot. But again, this is something I think it's completely beyond the control of a developer. If there was a magic recipe, I'm pretty sure companies will try to exploit it, but there's no magic. I mean, if you've seen how games and applications become popular on the app stores and get to the millions or tens or hundreds of millions like overnight, it's really extremely difficult to plan or to work in a way that you're going to have these large customer bases.
And you have you have ads also in, right? And then can the users turn those off?
Yeah, there is advertising. That's what we added that after we released XE6. I did a new build with the advertising. I really wasn't expecting much. I have like a long experience in hosting advertising, like on my blog, on my website. And in the very early days, when Google AdWords was new, like 10 years ago, you could get a little bit of money, but then it went to very little in my experience. Not that I have ever done much to like increase it. But the amount of money through advertising on mobile to me was mind-blogging. I mean, it's really extremely high in all rates. I mean, yes, it gets like millions of displays, but still it gets thousands of clicks. So it's very significant number, significant rate. Probably what really makes a striking difference is that my blog is for developers. Developers are probably the worst people to click on ads. While the app is for kids, and kids are probably the best people to click on ads. And in most cases, you see ads of other applications or other games, and that's certainly quite nice. The other comment that a friend of mine did is, well, you know, the application really does nothing. So the only thing that's lively and moving is the ads. So that's like a good reason people click on it.
And can you control who gets the ads? Because if this is used by kids, don't you want to control what the kids are seeing in the ads?
No, what you can do, you can apply filters. So you can filter categories. And of course I did, like filtering out all of the online gaming and a bunch of other categories. I mean, there are categories that don't even show up because they are completely out of the picture for Google. There are other that are certainly borderline, and you want to remove them for kids. The other thing you can do, you can specifically mark the application as an application that's good for kids, and Google is supposedly going to consider it when it's for ads. But it's hard to tell. And then, of course, ads really depend on the user, the location, the country, previous habits, because there is quite a bit of tracking that Google does. And so that's more or less my impression, but there is very limited control on these. The other thing you can do, you can disable competing ads. So suppose there is a company that's like competing with your application, you can disable specifically that app or that company from the advertisers.
And then as far as payments are concerned, how does it work with currencies in different countries around the world?
Well, basically you get everything in one currency, and you can set advertising in all of the countries and you end up getting US dollars. And then actually Google has, in most of the countries, at least around Europe, they just do direct wire transfer to your bank account. So it's actually pretty smooth.
Okay, excellent. If there are any more questions, you can put them into the question log. I can't wait for the next software from Jakob's company, maybe the next release or a newer piece of software. Who knows? Maybe you'll have his company and friends in Italy working on something new. That'll be fun. Yeah, sure. We'll see.
No, we actually have like 10 different apps in the pipeline, but he's 10. So when we say, okay, let's try to finish something, he said, no, I want to work on something else. So it's like, it's always something new. And so we have like a ton of things and ideas. We have a nice snake that is the Apple kind of game, but he wants to try to keep adding options to sell things in the game and other features. So it's like a feature creep. We keep adding features and like never releasing the app. And again, it's fine. I mean, it's not a business. It's just something to have fun together. And then like every month we start something new that generally gets scrapped midway.
And also a learning experience. There's another question here. Do you have any advice or know if there's any coding issues in having a free app with ads to an upgraded app with no ads? I mean, the ad component lets you turn that off, right?
Yeah, there are actually two ways to implement that that I've seen around. One is to have a free app with ads, like feature limited or even full blown, and then if either have a second app that is identical but hasn't got the ads, or the other option is do the ad removal as an in-app purchase. So within the app, you buy a token, and the token is remove the ads. Actually, I think that the demo application that Andres did with the clock had that option. So the clock had advertising, and then you could pay to remove the advertising within the same application rather than having a separate application on the store. But of course, if you see how games did it, there are like tons of different scenarios. Honestly, for the Android world, of course, in-app purchase for some big apps is still very popular, but advertising is a major source of revenue. While for iOS, it's more free version, paid version, or more in-app purchase. So the monetization is really a little different on the two platforms.
And then I know that back in August, and we did a hotfix, Google changed the advertising infrastructure they were using, right? And that's all handled by the hotfix for XZ6, and it's handled nicely using the right interface.
Yeah, since August 1, you could only upload apps that use the Play Store services for advertising rather than separate AdMob SDK. Now, it's not exactly clear the reason Google did it, although what they are trying to pushing, they are providing a significant number of services on the Play services, on the Google Play services. And the reason is that all of the Android clones or Android lookalike from Amazon, from the one Amazon ships to other Chinese Android clones, they have everything in the platform. You can even get to some of the further libraries, but the Play Store is really unique to the Google Android version. So they are trying to push people to kind of require the Google Play services, which implies requiring an official original version of Android with the Google advertising and Google capabilities.
Oh, here's one last question, Marco. If you have negative reviews for not running on certain devices, is there anything to do? I mean, we know that we support certain category of devices on Android, certain operating system versions, and ARM v7, Neon, right?
Yeah, that specific issue was not really tied to a version we don't support. It was actually tied to a bug in the application. So for like a few weeks, any new user downloading the app would get a version that just won't work. Because there was a bug I didn't test, because I was always testing on devices that already had a previous version. And it was a bug in the initialization of one missing field. So that's, I mean, a good part of that negative feedback was completely unrelated with actual Delphi or, I mean, compiler issues or something that was really in the application logic. That's not always the case. There have been other scenarios. One side is memory. Slower devices, when you load that amount of data, they don't behave terribly well. Again, we've done quite some work to optimize and clean up the app on loading, but still, on slower devices, they might even go to the point that they crash because they look non-responsive to the operating system. And one of the things I'm considering is actually adding some background threads to do some of the operations, again, to make it leaner on the OS.
And one thing I always pass along to developers is there's a utility in the Google Play Store called SysCheck, SYSCHECK, by Christopher Moeller, and you can tell your users to run that, and it'll check the device to see if it is capable of running a Delphi and C++ builder, a FireMonkey application, that it has ARM v7 and Neon instruction set. I'm not sure if there's anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, if you look at those negative comments on the Play Store, there were a bunch in the August timeframe, and they were due to, I mean, they were on phones where the actual application does run, and it was just a lack of testing for the app itself. Actually, I can actually explain the error. The error was there was a a time, and by mistake, I was adding a date time to a zero time or something similar. And there was a conversion done at the operating system for a zero value that was bumped to a daytime, and that's illegal, so that would raise an exception. It was like a foolish thing to do, but whatever. So the mistake was a wrong date conversion that happens only if you have a brand new version. If you had an existing, if you were upgrading from any older version, the application would be smooth. And I failed to catch it, again, for several weeks, actually, before I tried to put it on a phone of a friend, and it was not working. And I said, that's like impossible. The other issue that I've run into, and again, it was fixed at some point, is that the way I use the external storage, as I mentioned, and the external storage really does not exist on some devices. And this was quite puzzling to me. Or it is mapped to an SD card that you might not have, or even it's mapped to unknown. So I try to save to external storage, the application just crashes. Even if you have permission, even if everything is moved. And trying to do things like file exist would really misbehave. So that's a mistake, and I changed that part of the application as well.
But then when you see bad reviews or comments, you can't delete those, right? You can respond to them?
You can respond to them. Yeah, no, actually the application is quite interesting, because since day one, there is, I mean, if you look at the rating, there are, I mean, the majority of comments are like 5 stars. Then the second group, which is like half of those, is 0, 1 star. And then there's almost nothing in the middle. So it's the kind of application that people either hate or love. And some of the people who hate have had issues. Many of them just say it's useless, doesn't do anything. And yeah, I mean, that's like by design. And other people just love it. So it's one of those applications that really is a bit extreme. There's very few people that kind of like it. It either love or hate kind of relationship, which is quite intriguing. I've looked to a lot of reviews around the Play Store. That looks to be a little unique.